populous country in the world after China, India, and USA. Increase in population puts pressure on natural resources to generate more food, energy, water, and other needs. Furthermore, climate change poses one of the most serious risks to food and nutrition security in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia has updated its national determined contribution to reduce its greenhouse gas emission by 20% without international support, or 40% with international support by 2030. Reduction in the forestry and land use sector contributing 24% of greenhouse gas emission, and energy sector contributing 15% of greenhouse gas emission is the key achievement of Indonesian target. In addition to its commitment to achieve the target, the government of Indonesia has developed its long strategy on low carbon and climate resilience development by 2050. The strategy aims at reducing potential loss of the national gross domestic product by 3.45% due to climate change by 2050 through enhancing resilience in 4 development basic necessities such as food, energy, water, environmental health. Ladies and gentlemen, research, collaboration, invention, technological advance, and best practices contribution to enhance food, energy, water, and environmental health resiliency are paramount. This conference aims to provide a platform of academicians, researchers, practitioners, and publics to exchange information. The conference also offers an opportunity to develop networking among researchers, universities, governments, agencies, industries at local, regional, and or international levels. Before concluding, I would like to convey my appreciation to all the consortium members for their effort in organizing this international conference. We look forward to having a fruitful discussion during this international conference to better address global food security in the changing climate. So by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I open this conference officially. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Bapak Rektor, for the opening speech. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our opening ceremony today. Our next agenda is the signing of Memorandum of Understanding between the ICFS Consortium.
Lahir di bumi seribu masjid, Universitas Mataram menyajikan pengalaman menempuh pendidikan yang tak terbatas. Nuansa religius dan hamparan pesona alam yang menakjubkan. Sejak tanggal 1 Oktober 1962, Menteri Perguruan Tinggi dan Ilmu Pengetahuan Republik Indonesia mengesahkan pendirian Universitas Negeri di Mataram. Hadir sebagai solusi pengembangan sumber daya manusia yang berintelektualitas tinggi di Nusa Tenggara Barat, Universitas Mataram selalu berkembang dari masa ke masa. Hingga saat ini, Universitas Mataram telah memiliki 9 fakultas dan program pascasarjana. Dengan 63 program studi pilihan, menjadikan Universitas Mataram sebagai salah satu pilihan terbaik bagi talenta-talenta luar biasa dari seluruh penjuru Indonesia. Di Universitas Mataram, lebih dari 32.000 mahasiswa menjalankan studinya. Gali sumber-sumber ilmu pengetahuan dan ditempa menjadi instan yang siap menghadapi tantangan global. Meluluskan puluhan ribu alumni yang tersebar ke seluruh Nusantara. Universitas Mataram turut berkontribusi dalam berbagai sektor pembangunan di Indonesia. Untuk mendukung pengembangan ilmu pengetahuan dan penelitian, Universitas Mataram telah membangun berbagai fasilitas penunjang yang terstandarisasi. Berkolaborasi dengan berbagai stakeholder dan dunia industri memberikan peluang kepada mahasiswa untuk mendapatkan khazanah pengetahuan yang lebih luas dengan kemampuan soft skill yang teruji.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to proceed to MOU signing. Therefore, allow me to invite the Rector of the University of Hasanuddin Makassar as the initiator of ICFS Consortium to deliver the introductory remarks. Today, Mr. Rector will be presented by Professor Muhammad Arsyad, PhD, the Director of Publication Management Center. Please welcome Professor Muhammad Arsyad, PhD. Professor Arsyad, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Today we have a time to meet in this conference. Honorable President or Rector of Universitas Mataram, Professor Bambang. We also say congratulations for him for this new President of this university. We give applause for him. And Honorable Governor of this province and all president members of this university, and also the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, Dr. Sudirman. I should let you know that 1 year ago we visited this university, then asking possibility to have this conference, and one of the university saying we are ready to do is University of Mataram. So we really appreciate for that. And for this conference, first of all, I would like to let you know and then give me the best regard from my president, my rector, Professor Jamaluddin Jompang. As a new president, he has many things necessary condition, and then he asked us, and I am coming with Dr. Hatta Jamil as first the head of this consortium. So for this consortium, previously we have only 7 universities already took this initial, and then 7 universities: Hasanuddin University, and Universitas Mataram, Universitas Negeri Gorontalo, Universitas Tadulako, Universitas Haluleo, Universitas Sulawesi Barat, and Politeknik Pertanian Pembangunan Pertanian Goa. That previously we had 7 consortium members. And I got the information from this university that we have new members of this consortium, Pak Rektor. And they are Universitas Musamus Merauke. I think you are here with your president. And then also Udayana Bali. Welcome, Pak Rektor, our representing. And then finally we got also Nusa Cendana Kupang. So here, but President, thank you very much for this coming. And we see also here some of the association members. Indonesian Agriculture Economics, I think represented by Professor Marsuki here. And then also Professor Taslim as a representative Indonesian Agriculture Economic Society. And then all of the speakers, Ministry of Agriculture, our representative. And then Dr. Carol Kevin from University of Washington, and Dr. Ian Russell, European Union, Janet Reid, Mas University, and Professor Taslim Shah. And Hasanuddin University expected that we can continue this conference for next 10 years, Pak Rektor. Because we have already 10 university consortium members. The first one was held in Hasanuddin University. It was 1999. And then we just lost 2020 because of the COVID-19, and then moved back to this Mataram University. And for this next step of the conference, we will ask the committee and who will the host for next conference. Then informally, Universitas Tadulako will probably become host for the next year. So please give applause for this conference. And of course, as an initiator of the conference, we are very happy to see this today conference we can have, and then especially main purpose of seeing a possibility to have how we can solve at least the problem of this food security as a main or issues of the global society. And finally, let me appreciate my thanks to once again Pak Rektor, Professor Babang, and all of the Vice President, Dean of the Faculty, of having very nice hospitality of this conference, and also the Chairman of the committee, Dr. Halimatus Sadia, and then also Dr. Abdullah Usman. Especially also thanks to the Dean, Dr. Sudirman, for this availability of the conference. That's all our appreciation from Hasanuddin University. And for this, Dr. Hatta Jamil as representative Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture of Hasanuddin University, and will continue this cooperation, especially for getting output of this publication. So for this step, Universitas Hasanuddin will support of the publication of this conference. Last year we have around 150 publication in text by Scopus, and this time around 100 papers or more as committee chair at this time. Once again, thank you very much for all participants, and I hope enjoy with this conference and see the possibility of solving the problem. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor Muhammad Arsyad. So would you please stay on your position or take your position for the MOU, Pak Prof? Would you please take the position? Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow us to invite the representatives of ICFS consortium members to come to the stage. The Rector of University of Mataram, Professor Bambang Harikusumo. Director of University of Tadulako, Professor Dr. Insinyur Mahfuz, MP.
Director of State University of Gorontalo, Dr. Edward Wolok, STMT. Director of University of Halu Oleo, Professor Dr. Muhammad Zamrun Farihu.
Director of University of West Sulawesi, Dr. Insinyur Haji Aksan Jalaluddin MS. The Director of Politeknik Pembangunan Pertanian Goa, Dr. Insinyur Syaifuddin.
Director of Udayana University, Professor Dr. Insinyur I Nyoman Gede Antara, Master of Engineering IPU. Director of University of Nusa Cendana, Dr. Hewan Max UE Sanam MSc.
Director of University Musamus Merauke, Dr. Andus Beatus Tambaib MA. We welcome you to take the place and sign the document. Thank you. Oh.
The document will be signed by the rectors, and it will begin by the Vice Rector of Hasanuddin University. And then followed by the Rector of Mataram University. Then the Rector of Tadulako, Professor Dr. Insinyur Mahfuz MP.
And Director of State University of Gorontalo, Dr. Edward Wolok, STMT. Followed by Rector of University of Halu Oleo, Professor Dr. Muhammad Zamrun Farihu.
The next is Director of University of West Sulawesi, Dr. Insinyur Haji Ahsan Jalaluddin MS, and then followed by the Director of Politeknik Pembangunan Pertanian Goa, Dr. Insinyur Syaifuddin.
And Director of Udayana University, Professor Dr. Insinyur I Nyoman Gede Antara, MN IPU, Rector of University of Nusa Cendana, Dr. Hewan Max UE Saryani, MSc. And Director of University Musamus Merauke, Dr. Andus Beatus Tambaib MA. Thank you, gentlemen. Please stay on your position to receive souvenirs. We would like to invite Director of the University of Mataram to pass on the souvenir. Professor Bambang Harikusumo, PhD, please take the steps to pass the souvenirs.
Mungkin nanti dipoto dulu kali ya, mereka aja atau kita pokoknya udah sesuai. Oh jadi udah fotoan, berarti nggak perlu lagi kan mereka foto session.
Perlu sama-sama peserta Bapak Ibu. Nanti ya. Oh enggak ini sudah foto. Nanti yang terakhir setelah memorandum, setelah kerja PKS tadi baru foto session dengan seluruh peserta.
Oke. Terus apa sekarang ini? Enggak kan?
Dibilang stay position. Stay lagi. Receive souvenir.
Iya, dia akan receive.
Iya. please stay on your position to receive souvenir? We would like to invite the Rector of the University of Mataram, Professor Bambang Harikusumo, PhD, to pass the souvenir.
Sorry?
Semua, to all of, semua dibagi oleh.
Oh iya, ini memorandum of agreement between agricultural faculties of the university.
Ya udah berubah-ubah ini. Nggak apa-apa deh, biarin aja. Namanya Syaifuddin, bukan Syaifuddin.
Yang di jadwal itu satu yang dikirimkan sama Bu Hal.
Iya. Mohon maaf.
Zoom kan sudah ada yang dikirimkan.
Harusnya kita dikasih tahu sih, tapi nggak juga sih.
Ini dikit kok Bu. Jadi itu langsung dikasih semuanya, nggak kayak satu, cuma satu aja tadi.
Ini udah pembelajaran. Mbak ya, yang sekarang ngomong. You may return to your seat ya.
Thank you.
Harusnya tepuk tangan saya, jadi kita sebut tepuk tangan. Nggak tahu, maafkan.
Tapi lancar. Sebenarnya nggak yang buat kita?
Nggak tahu ya, nggak tahu. Gimana caranya? Ibunya noleh. Ayo. Bu Aluh.
Coba ibu datangin aja.
Ya, silakan. Oh, masih foto-foto ya. Gimana ya caranya ya? Kayaknya ada souvenir deh.
Ada yang buka.
Ibu Alu.
Telepon aja.
Saya aja.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may return to your position. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all the participants, our next agenda for today is the signing of Memorandum of Agreement between agricultural faculties from 10 universities. The document will be signed by the deans of Faculty of Agriculture from 10 universities. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite the Excellencies, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture of Hasanuddin University, Professor Dr. Insinyur Salengke, MSc, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture of University of Mataram, Insinyur Sudirman, MSc PhD, the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture from University Tadulako, Profesor Dr. Insinyur Muhardi, MSc IPM, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, the State University of Gorontalo, Dr. Insinyur Asda Rauf, MSI, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, University of Halu Oleo, Profesor Dr. Insinyur R. Marsuki Iswandi, MSI, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, University of Sulawesi Barat, Profesor Dr. Insinyur Haimuddin, MSI,
The Director of Politeknik Pembangunan Pertanian Goa, Dr. Insinyur Syaifuddin, MP, the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, the University of Udayana, Profesor Dr. Insinyur I Nyoman Gede Ustriana, MM, the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, University of Nusa Cendana, Dr. Insinyur Muhammad SM Nur, MSI. And the head of Lembaga Penelitian dan Pengabdian kepada Masyarakat LPPM, Isaac Habel Wayang, University of Musamus Merauke, Isaac Habel Wayangkau, STMT. The gentlemen, please take your position.
Ladies and gentlemen, the document will be signed first by the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture from University of Hasanuddin Makassar. and then will be followed by the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, Mataram University. And followed by the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, Universitas Tadulako, Profesor Dr. Insinyur Muhardi, MSI. Then the document will be signed by the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, the State University of Gorontalo, Dr. Insinyur Asda Rauf. And followed by the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, University of Halu Oleo, Profesor Dr. Insinyur R. Marsuki Iswandi, MSI. And it will be signed by the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture and Forestry, Universitas Sulawesi Barat, Profesor Dr. Insinyur Khaimuddin, MSI.
And the Director of Politeknik Pembangunan Pertanian Goa, Dr. Insinyur Saifuddin, MP. The next is the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, the University of Udayana, Profesor Dr. Insinyur I. Nyoman Gede Ustriana, MM. We welcome the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, the University of Nusa Cendana, Dr. Insinyur Muhammad S.M. Nur, MSI. And the head of LPPM, the University of Musamus Merauke, Isaac Habel Wayangkau, STMT. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay on your position because we are going to pass the souvenirs. And please, these souvenirs will be passed by the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, the University of Mataram, Bapak Dr. Sudirman.
session with dekan dulu, terus baru partisipan. Mikirin mereka berjejer, dekan yang belum dipanggil ke situ. Apa? Karena untuk kepentingan foto juga ya. Tinggal ini ya, kayaknya semua sudah ya.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please take position for photo session.
Semua ya, semua kelompok siapa?
Ladies and gentlemen, would you stay on your position because we are going to have another photo session with all of the participants in this room. For all the participants, please take position at the front for the photo session.
And all the keynote as well as online participants are welcome to take positions and turn on your camera for the participants on the Zoom platform.
And also directors.
And also directors, Mr. Rectors, please take a positions. And also I will invite the participants to take a photo sessions. Please
caranya?
step forward.
Di atas juga kali ya?
Bapak Ibu juga bisa mengambil posisi di atas dan para petugas bisa menggeser meja. Terima kasih. Mohon para petugas untuk menggeser meja MOU.
Beliau adalah dosen idola saya.
Sama. Apa yang dibawa itu benar? Benar.
Alhamdulillah nggak pernah di ini sih, nggak pernah di apa namanya, nggak pernah dikritik kalau sama Pak jujur sama dia punya jomplang banget. Saya dapat nilainya kadang cuma dapat 100, terus yang lain dapat 4 kan. Jadi saya tuh dari awal tuh kan ngefans. Pinter nih ya. Dia kan nggak pernah kayak OHP dulu, OHP kan sih masih RPL sih, dia nggak pernah OHP tulis pakai apa namanya, pakai speedo. Jadi saya tuh capek banget semua yang diceritain karena saya ngerti gitu. Terus dia foto, tenang Bu. Gak apa-apa deh. Nggak kelihatan. Yuk.
Apa itu? Karena pernah kita dengar dia ngomong, ih bentarnya bapak ini.
Kalau so far itu cuma 40 menit. Terus tes ujian apa nih? Ujian apa? Ini basi ya? Bapak. Oh, belum selesai Pak.
Silakan buat peserta Bapak Ibu yang belum mengambil foto bisa ke depan untuk berfoto bersama.
Jadi dulu tuh pas ujian, pas tes ini saya tuh sakit apa pas tes dosen yang dari internal kan, kamunya dari pusat kan soalnya yang dari internal dari yang bikin. Terus ini siapa kira-kira yang bisa saya pilih Pak? Saya apa? Itu pasti soalnya Bapak. Bisa saya jawab semua saya.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and you may return to your seat.
Saya ya? Iya.
Saya akan bicara. Ini siap menjadi ketua.
Kasih tahu saya kalau sudah siap untuk.
Kayaknya belum.
Fotoan. Atau langsung aja biar mereka nggak usah masuk-masuk, kasihan ya.
Honorable guests, dearest participants, ladies and gentlemen, the photo session have ended our opening ceremony. Then please join us ending this ceremony by reciting Hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will have 15 minutes break for coffee time. Our food stall is ready outside of this room, and please be note that the break is only 15 minutes. And please come back to this room to join the plenary session at around 10:30? Is it 10:30? Yeah. Around 10:30 a.m. Wita, and thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning.
Terhitung Januari 1967, 52 tahun silam Fakultas Pertanian Universitas Mataram berdiri berdasarkan surat keputusan Presidium Universitas Mataram pada tahun 1967.
Bapak Ibu,
Sejak berdirinya
kita
Fakultas
akan break
tertua
selama
ketiga
15 menit
Universitas Mataram
dan
ini
kita akan
telah
memulai
melahirkan
plenary
berbagai
session
inovasi
nanti di
dalam
pukul
dunia mendidik
10.30.
untuk mencetuskan kualitas alumni yang
Kami silakan
terbaik,
Bapak Ibu untuk
khususnya di sektor
mengambil
pertanian
kopi
di daerah
dan
Nusa
cemilan.
Tenggara Barat dan sekitarnya. Di bawah kepemimpinan Insinyur Sudirman MSc PhD, Dekan Fakultas Pertanian kini memiliki visi dan misi untuk masuk ke dalam kancah internasional, untuk mengembangkan sistem pertanian yang berkelanjutan, serta mewujudkan teknologi pertanian yang unggul.
Saya Dekan Fakultas Pertanian Universitas Mataram periode 2018-2022. Fakultas Pertanian sebagai satu fakultas tertua ketiga di Universitas Mataram saat ini berusia 52 tahun. Dalam perjalanan yang panjang itu, Fakultas Pertanian sampai pada visi mewujudkan Fakultas Pertanian yang berdaya saing internasional dalam pengembangan sistem pertanian berkelanjutan pada tahun 2025. Untuk mewujudkan visi tersebut, Fakultas Pertanian melaksanakan misi, yaitu menyelenggarakan pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian pada masyarakat melalui pengembangan dan penerapan ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi di bidang pertanian untuk mendukung pertanian berkelanjutan sehingga dapat memenuhi sumber daya manusia yang kompeten dan produk serta teknologi pertanian yang unggul. Saat ini Fakultas Pertanian memiliki 5 program studi yang berada di bawah 5 jurusan yang berbeda. Yang pertama, program studi agribisnis di bawah jurusan sosial ekonomi pertanian, yang program studi ini sekarang sudah terakreditasi A. Yang kedua, program studi agroekoteknologi yang berada di bawah jurusan budidaya pertanian dengan akreditasi B. Yang ketiga, program studi ilmu tanah, jurusan ilmu tanah yang terakreditasi B. Yang keempat, program studi budidaya perairan di bawah jurusan perikanan dan ilmu kelautan juga dengan akreditasi B. Dan yang kelima adalah program studi kehutanan di bawah jurusan kehutanan dengan akreditasi B.
Untuk memenuhi visi dan misi fakultas, Dekan juga memiliki beberapa wakil untuk membantu melancarkan target pencapaian. Dalam hal membenahi sistem pendidikan, baik dalam maupun luar ruang belajar mengajar, Wakil Dekan 1 tentunya memiliki pemikiran terupdate untuk mencetuskan kompetitor bidang pertanian dari kalangan mahasiswa maupun alumni yang mampu bersaing di tingkat nasional maupun internasional. Selain itu, Wakil Dekan 1 juga memiliki kuasa untuk merencanakan dan mengatur penelitian terkait bidang pertanian bersama mahasiswa maupun dosen di bidang keahlian masing-masing, hingga pengabdian terhadap masyarakat untuk terus menghadirkan ilmu terbarukan dalam dunia pertanian. serta melakukan kerjasama yang harmonis terhadap instansi maupun komunitas petani secara internal maupun eksternal fakultas sebagai lahan pengetahuan bersama dalam teknologi pertanian.
Tugas pokok Wakil Dekan 1 adalah sebagai ujung tombak tercapainya visi misi Dekan Fakultas Pertanian UNRAM, khususnya pada bidang akademik atau pendidikan, pengajaran, penelitian, dan pengabdian pada masyarakat, serta kerjasama. Tugas-tugas tersebut diimplementasikan melalui pelaksanaan kegiatan merencanakan, melaksanakan, mengembangkan, dan melakukan evaluasi pendidikan dan pengajaran. Merencanakan, melaksanakan, mengembangkan, dan melakukan evaluasi penelitian dan pengabdian masyarakat. Merencanakan, melaksanakan, mengembangkan, dan melakukan evaluasi kerjasama dengan lembaga lain. Melakukan pengendalian standarisasi baku mutu pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian kepada masyarakat. Meningkatkan penyelenggaraan pengelolaan tata kelola dan pendataan bidang administrasi keakademikan dan juga penelitian pengabdian masyarakat serta kerjasama. Melaksanakan koordinasi fungsional dengan Wakil Rektor 1 bidang akademik. Dan yang terakhir adalah bahwa Wakil Dekan 1 bertanggung jawab langsung kepada Dekan Fakultas Pertanian UNRAM.
Sedangkan untuk menertibkan segala urusan administrasi, keuangan, hingga prasarana untuk menunjang kelancaran pendidikan serta pelayanan terhadap mahasiswa maupun alumni Fakultas Pertanian yang diamanatkan kepada Wakil Dekan 2 tentu memiliki peran penting dalam pencapaian perencanaan yang termuat dalam visi dan misi fakultas.
Wakil Dekan 2 bertugas membantu dekan dalam menyelenggarakan, menjabarkan, dan mengembangkan kebijakan dekan dalam bidang administrasi umum, keuangan, kepegawaian, dan sarana prasarana fakultas, termasuk keamanan dan kenyamanan kampus. Wakil Dekan 2 membantu dekan dalam menyusun rencana dan program kerja jangka panjang, menyusun rencana strategis, dan rencana operasional tahunan fakultas. Wakil Dekan 2 juga bertugas melaksanakan pembinaan dan pengembangan tenaga dosen dan tenaga pegawai, melaksanakan pengelolaan dana dan sarana prasarana baik yang berasal dari pemerintah maupun dari masyarakat.
Membidangi kemahasiswaan dan alumni, Wakil Dekan 3 mempunyai semangat dalam mematangkan organisasi untuk ditingkatkan, termasuk pembinaan kreativitas untuk menghadirkan jiwa kewirausahaan dalam diri mahasiswa dengan menghadirkan pelajar dalam diskusi ilmiah yang bersifat kompetitif untuk dapat mewujudkan pengembangan sistem pertanian berkelanjutan.
Untuk mencapai visi Fakultas Pertanian yang berdaya saing internasional dalam pengembangan sistem pertanian berkelanjutan pada tahun 2025, maka peran Wakil Dekan 3 lebih diarahkan pada bidang pembinaan dan pengembangan mahasiswa dan alumni melalui program pengembangan kreativitas mahasiswa dan memotivasi mahasiswa dalam meningkatkan peran pada forum-forum ilmiah baik nasional maupun internasional. Kemudian peran selanjutnya yang tidak kalah penting adalah menumbuhkan wirausaha mahasiswa baik di lingkungan kampus maupun di luar lingkungan kampus melalui pengembangan usaha produk-produk primer maupun produk sekunder serta pengolahan hasil-hasil pertanian. Selain itu, dalam rangka mendorong dan mengimplementasikan program Merdeka Belajar dan Kampus Merdeka, WD3 juga memiliki peran strategis, yaitu memotivasi mahasiswa dalam program magang dan pengembangan usaha-usaha yang bersifat formal maupun informal, serta pada lingkup dalam negeri maupun luar negeri.
Demikian program studi yang dimiliki Fakultas Pertanian hingga kini terdiri dari 5 program studi, di antaranya program studi agroekoteknologi yang terdiri atas minat pemulihan tanaman, agronomi, hortikultura, ilmu hama dan penyakit tanaman. Adapun visi program studi agroekoteknologi sebagai pusat unggulan pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengembangan pertanian tropika berkelanjutan berbasis ilmu pengetahuan dan teknologi untuk meningkatkan kesejahteraan masyarakat. Program studi agribisnis terdiri atas minat agribisnis, penyuluhan, dan pengembangan masyarakat dengan visi mewujudkan program studi penyelenggaraan pendidikan agribisnis yang berkualitas untuk menghasilkan lulusan yang menguasai iptek serta mampu melaksanakan penelitian dan pengabdian yang bermanfaat bagi masyarakat dan memiliki daya saing internasional pada tahun 2025. Ilmu tanah dengan visi menghasilkan lulusan pertanian dengan spesialisasi ilmu tanah yang mampu menerapkan iptek dalam pengelolaan sumber daya lahan berkelanjutan dan berdaya saing nasional dan internasional pada tahun 2025. Budidaya perairan dengan visi menjadi program studi unggulan dalam bidang budidaya perairan laut yang berbasis riset dan berdaya saing internasional pada tahun 2025. Program studi kehutanan dengan visi menjadi program studi kehutanan yang berkualitas dan berdaya saing internasional berbasis riset bidang kehutanan pada tahun 2025.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to enter the plenary session. In this session, we will have two invited speakers, Dr. Carol Levine from University of Washington, USA, and Dr. Janet Reed from Massey University, New Zealand. This session will be led by our moderator, Professor E. Komang Damarjaya, PhD. First of all, please allow me to introduce our moderator to you. Professor Komang Damarjaya, PhD, is a professor in plant science or agronomy on agroecotechnology study program, Faculty of Agriculture, the University of Mataram. He graduated from the postgraduate or PhD program, Department of Life Science, Faculty of Science, Technology and Engineering, La Trobe University, Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Professor E. Komang Damarjaya. Professor Komang, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's such an honor to be in here chairing this meeting this morning. But first of all, I would like to say really good evening to Dr. Carol Levin because she's in the United States at the moment. And for Dr. Janet Ray, I would like to say good afternoon. I think the time difference between Mataram and Palmerston North is about 4 hours, so it's already afternoon in here. And to all participants in this building or wherever you are now in Zoom platform, this morning, we happy to have two prominent speakers to talk about climate change. We know that earlier Al Gore said that climate change is an inconvenient truth. So, believe it or not, it happened. And climate change has affected us in many ways, almost in all aspects of our life. And because of that, in some countries, possibly, the achievement of sustainable development goal can be halted. So that's why this morning we are very lucky to have two prominent speakers that already worked a lot on climate change in relation to food security. The first speakers, I would like to invite Dr. Carol Levin from University of Washington. There's a lot of information in here. Dr. Levin is a clinical associate professor at the Department of Global Health, University of Washington, and is recognized as global expert in costing health technologies and intervention in public health delivery system. As an expert in food security and nutrition, Dr. Levin has designed and implemented integrated agriculture and health services to maximize nutrition benefit of nutrient-rich food for pregnant women, their infant, and children. From 2009 to 2015, she led the operational research and economic evaluation in Western Kenya that generated evidence on the cost and benefit of a novel strategy to link the production and consumption of vitamin A-rich orange plus sweet potato to pregnant women and their children under 2 years of age. Dr. Levin conducted and published research on urban food security and nutrition as part of their tenure at the International Food Policy Research Institute from 1994 to 2000. Dr. Levin is not a stranger to Indonesia. She lived and conducted research on poverty, food insecurity, and nutrition in Lombok and other drought-prone regions in Indonesia as part of her PhD dissertation research from 1987 to 1989. So Dr. Levin has previously conducted research in the island of Lombok. So please welcome Dr. Levin, and your time is now. You have about 30 minutes to present. Thank you. I'm sorry, Dr. Levin, it seemed to be a technical problem. Please.
Selamat siang.
Oh, okay. Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Ya, selamat siang. Terima kasih, Bapak. And thank you, Bapak and Ibu. I was just saying I am really grateful to have been invited today, join you to speak at this second conference on sustaining food security and in the changing climate. Let me go ahead and share my PowerPoint, and let's make sure that you'll let me know if you're seeing my slides. Can you tell me if you're seeing the full slide? Yeah?
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay.
Clearly,
and
thank
you
you.
see the large display, not my notes. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay. All right, thank you. Perfect. Well, again, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I won't waste much time, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be there to join you. I would have loved to return to Lombok, a place very close to my heart. Today, my talk is called Evolving Food Systems and the Effect of Climate on Agriculture, Health, and Nutrition. Over 30 years ago, policymakers were concerned with seasonality in eastern Indonesia and looking to address seasonal food insecurity, catastrophic food insecurity, and strengthening household coping strategies to mitigate economic and nutrition effects of the climate, even 30 years ago and beyond that. Today, the gain in agricultural productivity experienced in Indonesia and around the world, along with growing economies and increasing incomes, are definitely being threatened by consequences of climate change. In this presentation, I will explore those interactions between climate, food, health, and well-being. Before I do, though, I do want to say a word about what it was like to live in Indonesia between 1987 and 1989. As Bapak mentioned, from 1987 to 89, I lived and worked in Indonesia on a Government of Indonesia project and a World Bank funded project to understand seasonality and its effect in eastern Indonesia, which, as you know, grows rice, but not as much as in Java, and also has a grows corn and other crops as well. West Nusa Tenggara was one of our study sites. In fact, Dr. Halimatis Sadia and I worked together in Lombok. There we are together. We explored the relationship between seasonality, food production, consumption, and nutrition outcomes. We focused on the relationship even then between food security and poverty. As you know, at that time, Lombok experienced regular food insecurity due to unimodal rainfall pattern and the risk of drought, which seemed to come every 5 years. Our focus at that time was on rice and maize, growing communities, and understanding those causes and coping strategies. 30 years later, much has changed in the world. We have the emergence of globalization and trade and supermarkets. Information is rapid through internets, but yet much has remained unchanged. And so we are experiencing both opportunities and threats that will define our future. And so as I mentioned, these photos show our team collecting data. Halima and I circled in yellow. We were measuring anthropometry at the village level, and we were visiting Puskesmas, the health workers, as you can see. So with that introduction, let me tell you my perspective. In my lifetime, working in this field of global health and development, we have seen extraordinary economic progress. This slide is 10 years old, but what it demonstrates is that from 1990 to 2011, we have seen a dramatic reduction in the number of poor, or the percentage of countries that have poor populations. In 1990, 60% of the world lived in low-income countries. In 2011, 11% of the world lived in low-income countries. The gains have been a little bit slower coming. In 2020, 9% of people lived in low-income countries. And in 2013, according to the UNDP, the past decade at that time, all countries accelerated their achievements in education, health, and income. And not a single country at that time scored lower on the Human Development Index than they had 12 years earlier. These are all impressive advancements that we've all experienced over time. And yet, if we look at the number of malnourished people today in 2020, and this is data from the Food and Agriculture Organization, the State of Food and Agriculture Report, we can see that hunger is still an issue. We have the prevalence of undernourishment, which is on the left axis, is around 10%, and the number of undernourished or hungry stays very close to 700 million. Hunger affects 9% of the population in Asia. Compared to 2019, there are more people hungry in Asia today, and of course that is partly due to COVID. And of course we cannot, we do know there have been improvements in food security and hunger in Southeast Asia over time. And specifically in Indonesia, the prevalence of undernourished improved from 2004 to when it was 19% of the population to about 6.5% of the population in 2020. Indicators of undernutrition, though, do remain above Southeast Asia regional averages in Indonesia. And so there's still some challenges in reducing stunting, which is at 35% in Indonesia, and acute malnutrition, which is 10%. So Indonesia is making progress in areas where it can control. For instance, Indonesia is meeting one of the key World Health Assembly targets to improve maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. Indonesia is on course to meet exclusive breastfeeding target with 50% of infants exclusively breastfed. But Indonesia is also experiencing what is called the double burden of malnutrition, where undernutrition and overnutrition coexist. Recent data indicates an emergence of overweight and obesity. 11% of children under 5 years of age are now overweight, and 7% of adults were classified as obese as of 2016. If we look at the distribution of Indonesia's population by income levels, we can see that these trends in nutrition, both undernutrition and obesity, are happening at a time when incomes have in fact been increasing. So you can see on the left-hand side is the distribution of the population with living below $30 a day in the green, $10 a day in yellow, 5 in red, 3 in orange, and that below $1 a day. And you can see that as of 2000, we don't have people living below $1 a day anymore. So that's a great improvement in income. In rural areas, that improvement is also there, but it is not as rapid. We don't have as many people living above $10 a day, $20 a day, and $30 a day in rural areas. So there has been improvement in incomes, but not as much in rural areas. And in fact, despite these improvements, you can see that, as I mentioned earlier, stunting, which is the first orange line on this graph, is currently at 30%. And of course, wasting is at around 10%, and overweight is around 10%. So again, we see that Indonesia is making progress in meeting improved nutrition goals, but in fact that there's some emerging problems. The rise of obesity is particularly concerning because diet-related obesity can lead to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other health problems. So today, what I'd like to do is use a food system lens or approach to explore these factors affecting health and nutrition with a special focus on the role of climate change. What is a food system? There's a lot of interest in the topic recently, stimulated by the International Conference on Nutrition, the second one, and with much greater attention to global nutrition and agriculture in recent years. The World Bank, the Global Panel on Ag and Food Systems, the Agenda for Global Food Systems, many groups have been starting to use a food system framework to understand food security, diet quality, everything that affects our access to food. And what's nice about this framework, as you can see, is it brings in climate quite clearly: soil, water, climate, plants and animals, nutrients, through biophysical environment. It recognizes the importance of science and technology. It recognizes the importance of social organizations. But the food system involves people at every stage of converting natural resources into food to sustain human life. We like to say from farm to flush, including growing, producing, harvesting, processing, packaging, distributing, marketing, trading, consuming, and disposing of waste. The food system incorporates dynamics of both the supply of food, involving complex and sophisticated supply chains, and shorter and simpler supply chains, as well as demand, what people can afford to buy and the choices they make. And we have seen, as I mentioned, that the food system has undergone a structural transformation, with different countries experiencing this transformation to a greater or lesser degree, and even within the same country, with urban areas experiencing differences than rural. There have been shifts from labor to capital-intensive production, We have experienced less diversity in cropping patterns, longer supply chains that include processing and packaging. These changes do not happen quickly, and they're not necessarily inevitable, but their effects can be observed over many domains, and ultimately they determine the outcomes of a given food system. If we think about the major drivers of recent food security and nutrition trends, so you remember I indicated that we are seeing an increase in hunger, undernourishment. We can think about 4 key areas. Over the past decade, there has been an increase in the frequency and intensity of conflict, climate variability and extremes, economic slowdown, and of course, we have all lived through COVID-19 and how it has contributed to economic uncertainty, hunger, and food insecurity worldwide. Now, each of these major drivers is unique, and as I mentioned in the previous slide, they are often considered external to the food system, but they interact to create multiple compounding impacts at different points of the food system, which becomes a problem for food security and nutrition. The FAO State of Food Security and Nutrition report highlights that the recent increases in the unaffordability of healthy diets is associated with severe and moderate forms of food insecurity. Climate shocks, low productivity, inefficient food supply chains to food systems are pushing up the cost of nutritious foods, when combined with lower incomes is increasing the unaffordability of healthy diets. 30 years ago, we tended to focus mostly on food security at the household level and poverty at the community level. Today, the food system approach is essential to understand the complexity and possible solutions for the future because we are so interconnected. Let's take another look, another framework that can help us to see this. In this figure, we look at the impacts of various drivers on food systems and how these affect food security and nutrition. The graph highlights in dark blue boxes the major factors that I just mentioned that are behind recent rises in hunger and slowdown in the progress of reducing malnutrition in all its forms, climate variability, economic slowdowns, conflict and poverty and inequality. And these, we'll see in a moment how these factors affect the food systems that produce the food, these affect the food supply chain, affordability of diets, consumer behavior, and eventually nutrition and health, as well as broader impacts in society. So food systems play a central role, not only in determining the quantity, quality, and diversity and nutritional content of foods available for consumption, but also in sustaining the livelihoods of millions of people around the world. Food systems have a major impact on health, both positive and negative, through many channels, and of course, food systems affect the environment and ecosystem health of our planet. So, it's important for us to explore some of these in greater detail. Again, just highlighting climate and variability. So, hunger is higher in countries affected by climate extremes. So I started my presentation showing you slides of increases in hunger. In the top, countries are facing increasing climate variability and more frequent climate extremes linked to climate change. So in the top graph, it shows that 60% of all Asian countries have experienced multiple types of climate extremes, heat waves, drought, flooding, right? And these have increased between 2015 and 2020. They are up 11% from 2000 to 2004. In the lower graph, you can see the prevalence of undernourishment from 2010 to 2020. The dashed lines show the prevalence of undernourishment in countries with no conflict, no climate change, low inequality, and not affected by economic downturns. You can see that countries affected by conflict, climate extremes, the solid orange line, high income inequality, and economic recessions have much higher prevalence of hunger. So all of those solid lines at the top of the graph are in countries affected by climate, conflict, inequality, or economic downturns. And remember, these are all interlinked. Now, of course, climate also affects health and nutrition through many other channels. Hunger is just one. Climate extremes due to climate change affect the nutritional quality of crops. Recently, there has been a number of research studies showing the effect of changing carbon dioxide levels on diet quality, on the quality of rice grains. These articles are by Christy Eby. She is actually a researcher at the University of Washington, and she has generated evidence on the effect of climate on quality of crops. In addition, climate extremes directly increase health risks. So we know that climate change has altered global to local weather patterns, increased sea levels, average temperatures, precipitation amounts, humidity, and again, remember, heat waves, which are lasting longer, more intense, more floods, more droughts. These changes collectively increase the number of injuries, illnesses, deaths from a wide range of what we say climate-sensitive health outcomes. Let's first look at the effect on climate change very simply on human nutrition. So here are some of those factors I mentioned on the left-hand side of my graph: shifting seasonal patterns, increasing temperatures, increasing carbon dioxide levels, sea level increases. All of these will have an impact on food product quality that I mentioned, for instance, on the content of foods, the macronutrient and micronutrient content, and they will also affect the quantity of food produced, hence its accessibility to households and its affordability of nutritious, healthy diets. And this goes on to have an effect on human nutrition through anemia, iodine deficiency, protein deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, reducing child growth, and other nutritional health impacts that affect nutrition, such as diarrhea disease. According to the 6th assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, climate change is actually increasing infectious diseases, food and water safety and insecurity, and non-communicable diseases. So climate change is increasing vector-borne and waterborne diseases, undernutrition, I mentioned nutritional and diarrheal diseases and malaria. You can see that food and water safety and insecurity are affected because of loss of renewable surface water, loss of groundwater, greenhouse gas emissions, and biodiversity loss, soil degradation, crop yields. And lastly, unexpectedly, in a way, we wouldn't think about non-communicable diseases, but our mental health, our well-being. We understand that adolescents and youth are concerned about the future of our planet. And this causes a lot of stress on a regular basis, not just to youth, but to all of us. We see increases in allergies, and we certainly see increases in cardiovascular, respiratory, and diabetes. Note that non-communicable diseases are those conditions that are not transmitted from one person to another. Rather, they are strongly linked to lifestyle choices. But as we get child illness and malnutrition under control in our countries, we're starting to see a larger share of death and disability due to non-communicable diseases, right? And so many of these are sensitive to climate. The ones listed here, in addition, cancers are also sensitive to climate. Now, so far, I've been talking about the effect of climate on health and nutrition and on diet. But we know that our diets, our evolving diets, are also having an impact on the environment. As I mentioned, increasing incomes around the world and in Indonesia have led to changes in the demand for the kind of foods we eat. We're demanding more foods from many sources. We're importing more food. We're shipping food globally around the world, which has a huge transport cost, both cost and air quality and carbon dioxide. But we're also, in our own countries, demanding more nutrient products in some way, for instance, animal products. So in this graph, you can see that the production of beef and lamb, pork and poultry account for a large part of land use in Indonesia. This graph is for Indonesia. And, this graph is globally, excuse me, I'll show Indonesia in a moment. So globally, animal production is taking up over 50% of emitting greenhouse gases, land use, and crops, grains, are actually contributing, consuming fresh water, responsible for nitrogen application and also phosphorus application. So food production generates more than 1/3 of all greenhouse gas globally. And so you can see that our current dietary patterns are really not healthy for the planet and they may not be sustainable. Now here is a graph from the 2021 Global Nutrition Report that shows how Indonesia's food system impacts the environment. And again, you can see increasing greenhouse emissions due to animal production or consumption. And again, the same patterns you saw at the global level, that cereals, grains, fruits and vegetables consume and require nitrogen and phosphorus and consume fresh water. So these, you can see that this metric is what does the diet put, how does it put pressure on the current system? And you can see that what we eat affects our planet. So it works in both directions. So what can we do to transform our food systems to allow us to have food security, nutrition, access to affordable diets for all? There's a focus now on health, nature, positive, inclusive food systems. So you can see that there are 6 pathways listed on this slide. I will talk about, I'll let you read these on your own, and I will mention a few examples of ways we can start to think about transforming food systems. We have to always be thinking about trade-offs, right? So land productivity trade-offs. How do you use technology to reduce cropland expansion, to be water saving? How do you protect biodiversity? How do you start to integrate interventions that are more effective in preserving biodiversity? How do you, can you integrate supply side measures that increase crop yields and that reduce food waste and lower the consumption of animal-based calories? There are people that think that the loss of biodiversity can be reversed even as agricultural prices are reduced by 20%. There are ways to do it. How do we consider our dietary changes? Can we reduce consumption of livestock products in regions that are over-consuming them? Can we reduce deforestation? And if we do this, can we reduce carbon pollution? And how do we think about solutions for livestock production? For instance, low-intensity restorative livestock systems. How do we start to think about new ways of are livestock systems that are both regenerative and don't have a negative impact on the environment. And then finally, if one looks at very specific policy recommendations to reduce climate variability, there are, by the FAO State of Food and Agriculture report, broad policy areas now that are recommending to reduce climate risk, to establish climate risk monitoring and early warning systems, and Lombok has had experience with early warning systems for food security for many years. And then also, as I mentioned, improving access to and management of natural productive resources. Finally, and my last slide, is to think about investment choices for healthy food system. And I'll leave you with some positive considerations. Every food system has the capacity to produce healthy food that is needed for good nutrition and human health. Food system investments have to be tailored to specific contexts, not just Indonesia, but Lombok versus Jakarta versus Java versus Mataram, right? Urban, rural, which island, which cropping system. Climate risks, vulnerability, and adaptation measures, indicators, must be factored into decision-making at all levels. We're very used to thinking about food security indicators, poverty indicators, but we must start to think about new indicators that help us to assess climate risk and vulnerability. The fourth point, investments have a higher payoff when enabling conditions are present. That means that climate and agriculture and health sectors must work together and work toward the same goals. Public investment in food systems should be aligned with other social and environmental goals. And lastly, development banks and other financial investment institutions should look to improving investments that meet environmental, nutrition, and health goals. So with that, I'll close and thank you. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you for inviting me. I'll close there now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lavin. I think that's very important notes that we have to take regarding that the policy option that we have to take in the future to tackle the climate variability effect. And as you stated earlier that the climate variability has affected not only the agriculture but also the food and the food nutrition, including the eating behavior. So what we need to strengthen in here is our food system. I think because due to the late night in the United States, we will continue with the question-answer session to Dr. Lavin, and I'm sorry to Dr. Reid. We will go with you after finish the question and answer for Dr. Lavin. Yeah, please, participant. Yeah, the first one, Professor Arshad. Yeah, the other one from this room. Tolong. Yeah, just a moment. Just one by one.
Okay, thank you very much for the moderator giving me a chance. Good evening, Dr. Levin.
Selamat siang.
Okay, selamat siang. Yeah, I have a preference to ask something. Well, I am Muhammad Arshad, Professor of Agriculture, Economics, and Rural Development at Sanudin University. I have two possible probably question. First one is, as you said, that climate change strongly affect the quality of food. That's some. So, do you have a specific local context for the policy in your country to solve this problem? By assuming that the changing of climate change is very rapidly and with the harder difficulty, especially for us here in Indonesia as a tropical waste system. That one. Second one is how your country probably have a good experience and having food systems as a specific local context of this system as a food global system. Thank you very much. That's 2 questions.
Thank you, Professor Asad. I think the second one is the lady in there. We have 3 questions from the audience here, and we're waiting for question from the chat box. Please, the second one, Ibu.
All right, thank you so much, Pak Moderator. Thanks for your very interesting presentation.
Please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm so sorry. My name is Hardianti Sultan. I'm from Tadulako University, Central of Sulawesi. Your presentation was very interesting for me, Dr. Carol Levine. I'm so interested when you mention about mental health. You say that one of the impact of climate change is mental health. Which kind or which type of mental health that affected by climate change? Because as far as I know, there are so many types of mental health, and which kind of mental health? And then, is this mental health affect to the nature or the child or who? And then the last one is, how can we fix if there are mental health impact from climate change? How can we fix it? Is this a big problem based on your research, or did you have the data about the mental health? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ibu Sarati. The last one from this room, please. That's the one lady in the back, please. Ibu Yulvia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Yulvia from the University of Mataram. I'm also researcher and gender expert in some rural development programs. Thank you for the very valuable presentation, Ibu Carol. I have 2 points. The first is, as you explained before, that the food security probably reduced in the last couple of years because of climate vulnerability, conflicts, economic slowdowns, and COVID-19 pandemic. So what about natural disasters? Because we know that the natural disasters are caused by at least 2 aspects, because of human causes, for example, like floodings, landslides, and so on. And the second one is earthquakes, because we in Lombok and Sulawesi experienced these disasters very badly in 2018. So what do you think about this aspect? The second one is I'm interested to know about, because I've been involving in some research and development projects, including climate change, especially when we propose for some projects, like overseas projects for research, for example. We have some problems whenever we develop proposals, especially about the data, the source of data for interventions. We have some sources for technical from some institutions, for example, from Climate Bureau and so on. But when we go to the real life to cross-check to the real to the community, but we often face difficulties to find the impacts of climate change based on what people said. Okay, people also probably remember what they experienced in the last 10 years, but the problem is no documentation for that, especially in Indonesia. About the data is very poor. Yeah, and sometimes we got the data from media or from some institution. For example, we have PNB. What is the name? Like an institution that help people whenever there is a disasters. So, but they also do not record the accidents thoroughly. So this also become our problems here. So what do you think about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Yulvia. I think to make this discussion effective, please answer the first question from Professor Arshad. Please,
okay.
Dr. Levin.
Okay,
thank you.
Great. So the first question was on what can we do about the changing quality of crop grains, and I'm not really an expert in the plant science and the climate nutrition nexus, so unfortunately I can't answer that question. I've been working more squarely in human health and nutrition and agriculture, so I would have to refer you to, if you saw we'll be sharing the slides, and there's two publications that I share. I would encourage you to review those. I'm sure that they have some recommendations about what can be done. So I'm sorry not to be able to answer that. In terms of how do we, is there anything that Indonesia can learn from the United States on climate, on agriculture production? And that's a very interesting question. Recently, a colleague of mine and I did an exercise to develop food system typologies. And in fact, the United States is in a very different food system category than Indonesia. So US is in a highly industrialized food system. We have very few farmers and very large mechanized farms that use pesticides and fertilizer intensively, and it's industrialized commercial agriculture. Meanwhile, Indonesia actually is still very much the factors of production are not as detrimental in some ways to the environment as in the United States, right? Whereas in Lombok, you do have these extreme weather patterns, and maybe the rest of Indonesia, your production technology is still, from what I understand, and you can correct me, is still predominantly small farmers. And so they're not comparable. So all that to say, the food system matters so much because the solution has to be specific on how land, labor, and capital are used. And these are different in the US versus Indonesia. Would you like me to answer the second and third question as well?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think I'll answer the question. There was a question in the chat box which is related to the first question. And it says, would you explain the second conclusion about the food system investment needs to be tailored to the specific context? And the reason why I want to take that question is it builds on what I just mentioned, that if we think about a food system typology that is based on food consumption patterns, a series of environmental indicators related to nitrogen, content of soils or carbon dioxide, land use patterns, if we look at the share of consumption that comes from fruits and vegetables or from meats or from staple foods, we have to consider these key indicators that define a food system, and then you have to tailor the investment, not just to that country, but as I mentioned, I believe the solution is a local solution, right? Food systems, we're part of a global network, but we also, our land and our labor are very localized. And so every investment has to take into the special consideration, the special context. So I hope I answered the question in the chat box.
Thank you.
Now I'll go, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, please go to the second question about
the second question on mental health. So you asked about what types of mental health and how do you fix it? What we observe in the United States are high levels of anxiety among adolescents and a sense of despair and depression. And so we recognize today that anxiety is a form of behavioral health. It's not the same as necessarily schizophrenia, but it does, anxiety can lead to substance abuse. And as you know, the United States is experiencing an all-time high of substance abuse and actually deaths by substance abuse. Part of this, of course, is related to COVID, but we also know that there's a feeling of sort of helplessness and around climate in the future. And our young people feel this much more, I think, than people in my age group. You asked how to fix it. In the United States, our schools are getting very conscious about promoting mindfulness, which means slowing down and giving students tools to find strength from within. Also, we are streamlining mental health practices called cognitive behavioral therapy that helps people manage anxiety and depression. That's the experience from the United States. Of course, again, context is important, and so it may manifest differently in Indonesia. And there's one last question if you want me to address that. Okay. So there was a question on natural disasters. Of course, certainly the natural disasters that have a human footprint, right, that the human development leading to landslides. I wasn't sure if I understood the second one, upgrades, but certainly I think you could consider conflict, natural disasters, climate disasters, inequality. All of those things are certainly contributing to food insecurity. Your second question around data I thought was very interesting. In fact, we've been quite fortunate, those of us working in food security for the last 30 years, because we have been developing very robust metrics for food security. I noticed when we were trying to select indicators to capture the environmental impact of food systems, it was very challenging. First of all, there's many, many indicators, and there's not much consensus by the experts on which we should use. And so one indicator might be a diversity index, biodiversity index, but there's so many indicators, there's a lack of consensus, and therefore it's not surprising to me that the data is poor. And so I guess just as our global community came together to make nutrition a priority and food security, there will have to be a sustained effort and maybe a large convening to get consensus on which indicators and to help support countries to collect these data at all levels. Over.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Levine. I think time is limiting. If there is another question probably in the chat box. Any question from the chat box? Still left? No, we don't have time for the floor in here, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, any question from chat box?
There's one, but if you want me, there is one question.
Yes, please, please answer this for the last question.
Okay. Okay, so the question is, climate change is driven by food loss and food waste, ranging from farm to end consumer. According to UNEP, wasted food globally reached 931 million tons in 2019, whereas there is still hungry in the world. As the food lost and food waste is increasing, leads to increasing of environmental decay. It means those situations will keep maintaining the hunger. What's your perspective about this phenomenon, and what's your advice to overcome this? Thank you. That's an extremely important topic. Again, food waste and food lost is an underlooked and underinvested in topic. I know that the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition is recently has investments to explore food waste, and there are other global organizations looking at that. It's I agree with you completely. Unfortunately, I don't have solutions. I guess I would go back to, you know, during COVID, when we had the lockdowns, there was food going to waste in our warehouses because we have such a specialized supply chain nowadays, right? And I think the specialized supply chains have inhibited our ability to work together to identify surpluses and food waste and to move food from those that have it to those that don't. And so I guess until we have a department that's maybe designated to coordinate across these vertical production supply chains and at the consumer end, from supermarkets to wet markets, I think we need coordination and new institutions that address this critically important program. But that's just talking from the top of my head. Sounds like you may have some thoughts and solutions yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lapin. I think we're running out of time right now.
Yes.
And then for the strategy that we need to take, your sixth strategy, I think is very important point that we need to learn to implement for the future. Without further ado, I think we give applause to Dr. Lapin for very extraordinary presentation and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before leaving, I think this will be presentation of souvenir virtually to Dr. Lapin committee. Yeah, because, oh no, yeah, maybe later, yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Lapin, and
thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to have our second speakers from Marseille University, Dr. Janet Reid. Dr. Janet Reid is a fellowship and a member of New Zealand Institute of Primary Industry Management, member since 2008, and also a member of Australasian Pacific Extension Network, a member since 2005. Certification and registration, license, mentor supervisor, Massey University. She has a lot of research interests, including government and governing of New Zealand agriculture, in particular sustainable agriculture, farmer knowledge culture, and the influence of this on farmers' practice, but also how to capture this to inform and influence policy that impact on farmers. The role of regional council and central government in shaping on farm decision by farmers, agricultural extension and consultancy as a form of governing, but also as a form of rural development, and the application of system innovation in the primary sectors in New Zealand. Recently,
Salam Sejatira, Kia ora koutou from Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name's Dr. Janet Reid, and firstly I'd like to acknowledge the Honourable
Kia ora, Dr. Reid.
This is a schematic representation of the cascading effects of climate change impacts on food security and nutrition that I've taken from an FAO publication in 2015.
Okay, then that's.
And what this
play the video.
diagram
Thank
does,
you.
which I really like, is very emphatically shows the link between climate change and food security, expressed here in terms of availability, access, utilisation and stability, but the role that agriculture plays, and therefore farmers, smallholders, in the link between climate change and food security. Because ultimately, farmers, agricultural producers, are the food producers that we rely on for the provision of food that ensures food security. And so in this talk, as is the focus of the majority of my research, I'm going to focus on thinking about the farmers, but also on the people that support farming and the production from farms that ultimately influences food security, and make some points about thinking about how we might be able to respond and the nature of the responses and changes that are going to be required, not only at the farm level, but at the much broader level, if we are actually going to make changes that are required to overcome the issues of climate change's impact on food security. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera, kia ora koutou from Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name's Dr. Janet Reid, and firstly I'd like to acknowledge the Honourable Rector of the University of Mataram and the organisers of this conference, and thank you for kindly inviting me to be a keynote speaker today. I do want to apologise for not being able to be there in person. I would love to be back in Lombok and attending this conference with my colleagues from the University of Mataram. I also want to apologise for not being able to present this talk in real time, and therefore I cannot participate in any questions or discussion that arises from this presentation. Due to unforeseen circumstances, I'm just not able to participate in that way today. What I do hope is that at least my presentation creates a catalyst for some discussion amongst the people that are listening, or just some reflection on your own experiences and what that might mean in terms of your role in contributing to change around climate change and food security, particularly in the agricultural context going forward. The title of my presentation today is Reflections on the Transformation Needed to Achieve Food Security in the Context of Climate Change. In this talk today, I'm really going to position the talk again in the context of climate change, and reminding us again, and I'm sure many other speakers will do that as well at this conference, of the link between agriculture and food security and the importance of agriculture in food security, but also therefore how critical it is for us to consider how we can respond to climate change in relation to its impact on agriculture and therefore food security. I want to introduce the concept of a transition, and in particular sustainability transition, as a framework for looking at the topic that is the focus for this conference. but in particular that focus on food security and climate change. I then will highlight some of the key points that I would like you to take away from this talk as an introduction to some reflections that I will then make on research that I have been involved with, primarily with PhD students, including your colleague Dr. Yanuatati, and to draw out some of the points by providing some illustrations from this research to provide richness, hopefully, but also, as I've said before, just to reinforce some of the points that I want to make in my talk. I will then draw the presentation to a close with a conclusion. Climate change impacts on food security. Inarguable. And the way that cause and effect relationship works is multidimensional and complex. The IPCC in their AR5 report identified 4 of the 8 key risks identified in that report as being linked to food security. 4 of the 8. And they are loss of rural livelihoods and income, the risk of the loss of marine and coastal ecosystems and livelihoods, and the risk of losing terrestrial and inland water ecosystems, and food insecurity and the breakdown of food systems. This is a schematic representation of the cascading effects of climate change impacts on food security and nutrition that I've taken from an FAO publication in 2015. And what this diagram does, which I really like, is very emphatically shows the link between climate change and food security, expressed here in terms of availability, access, utilisation and stability, but the role that agriculture plays, and therefore farmers, smallholders, in the link between climate change and food security. Because ultimately, farmers, agricultural producers, are the food producers that we rely on for the provision of food that ensures food security. And so, in this talk, as is the focus of the majority of my research, I'm going to focus on thinking about the farmers, but also on the people that support farming and the production from farms that ultimately influences food security, and make some points about thinking about how we might be able to respond and the nature of the responses and changes that are going to be required, not only at the farm level, but at the much broader level, if we are actually going to make changes that are required to overcome the issues of climate change's impact on food security. The nature of the issues related to climate change and food security, and hence agriculture, are multi-dimensional and interconnected. There is strong agreement in the literature that there is a need for more resilient systems and enhanced adaptive capacity to respond to the challenges of climate change and food security. The changes that we need to put in place demand responses that are multidimensional across multiple scales. The nature of this change is transformational. And I want to talk a wee bit more about the nature of this change by introducing the concept of a transition, and in particular a sustainability transition. Sustainability transitions. This is a concept that attempts to capture the extent of the changes that are required for us to face the sorts of challenges that society today faces, including climate change and food security. But it's worthwhile remembering, as we are thinking about the subject of the conference today, that these are not the only challenges, if we think about agriculture and farmers, that are being faced. There is also environmental degradation. There is the constant push and drivers to become more commercialised, to move towards more market-led agriculture, in addition to, as well as associated with climate change and food security. So what are sustainability transitions? These are long-term changes. They take decades. And an example of one that might be helpful here to illustrate the extent of the change, one that has been researched and looked at quite a lot, is the example of the shift to renewable energy in the energy sector in Europe, in parts of Europe. So the move away from fossil fuels, fossil energy sources, to renewable energy. So away from the use of petroleums, coals, to solar power, wind power sources of energy. And if you think about the nature of the change required to transform the energy sector from being reliant on coal to one that draws on wind and sun, you get some sense of the extent of the changes required in what is called a sustainability transition. It requires radical change across multiple dimensions and across multiple scales. It involves multiple actors, and multiple actors contribute to enacting change across those multiple dimensions and multiple scales. The nature of change in a transition is non-linear. It's characterized by disruptive, shock-wise change rather than constant, stepwise change. They're also characterized by variation and selection. Sustainability transitions are viewed often as in part being brought about by innovators who take risks, who start small but are driven by a desire to do things radically differently. And those radical innovations create change, feed change when there is a space that enables that change to occur. And as we move into a transition, through a transition, more and more innovations will be created as more and more spaces are provided for these innovations to occur. So they are characterized by variation and selection. And what that refers to is the fact that you're going to get a variety of new innovations developed, a range of technologies being developed, and some of them will be selected, only some of them. And those that are selected will help to shape the overall transition, because those technologies will inform regime change, structural change, institutional change. The other characteristic of transitions that's important is that they're emergent. They're not managed. We cannot plan or foresee where we're going to end up. The nature of the new stableness of a transition through the The smallholder commercial dairying activities that emerged, complex, dynamic and diverse, not surprisingly. Based on production systems and milk selling patterns, smallholders fell into three categories: low, middle and high. And I'm going to focus on the contrast between the low and the high at the time I've got available. The high were relatively highly resource endowed. They were the wealthy relative to the low smallholders. They were had highly diversified and complementary livelihood and income portfolios that they had developed over time. They ran high input, high output dairy production systems. The group of smallholders in the high group sold consistent volumes of milk regularly through the year, high levels to the formal market and had high levels of formal market participation, and were able to supply and dominate both the formal and the informal markets. In contrast, those smallholders that fell into the low group, based on their production systems and milk selling patterns, were resource constrained, were poor, had the least diversified livelihood and income portfolios, and dairying was the major livelihood activity, whereas for the high, dairying was one of a number of income generating livelihood activities. For the low smallholder farmers, their production systems were low input, low output. For the low smallholders, they sold variable volumes of milk seasonally to both the informal and the formal markets. They relied strongly on the informal market and were not able to access all markets that were available to them. The high smallholders tended not to conform strongly to socio-cultural norms related to milk. They tended to align more strongly with commercial logic in farming, and in particular in their dairy production and access to market. They predominantly used milk for exchange functions and consumption functions, so exchange for income, and they did consume some in the household. They had strong bonding and bridging social capital in the dairy sector. So they had strong networks with their neighbours and with their local community, which included a diverse range of smallholders, both low, middle and high. But they also significantly had good networks, bridging networks into the dairy companies that were buying and processing milk, into the advisors in the government, into that broader level of network. In contrast, the smallholders that fell into the low group adhered strongly to traditional socio-cultural norms related to milk and dairy animals. They had strong bonding social capital and weak bridging, so they relied heavily on their relationships with their families, their extended family, their neighbours, their local community. They did not have good networks into the dairy companies or to those broader networks that the high smallholders did. A significant volume of the milk that smallholders produced, the volume of which was lower than the high smallholders produced, but a significant proportion of what they did produce was actually used for social function. They gifted it to other members of their community. They did not use it for exchange to the same extent or for consumption in the household. And the gifting function provided them with the security of the reciprocity of relationships that was incredibly important for them, because it was those relationships that they relied upon to weather the storm. If they experienced a shock or a crisis, then it was their social networks then networks with other members of their community that actually provided the resilience that they needed to be able to get through those shocks. Continuing with the theme around farmers, I'm going to draw on some of the research from Dr. Yofia Yanawatati, but also from the IFSCA project. Myself and a number of other colleagues from Massey University were incredibly lucky to be involved in a New Zealand government-funded project where we worked in partnership with colleagues from the University of Mataram on a project that was focused around building amongst smallholder farmers a culture of seeing barley cattle in a commercial sense. So we can view it in a similar sort of transition, the shift towards the more commercialisation of agriculture, the shift from more subsistence, non-commercial view of beef, in this particularly of sapi, to one of commercialisation in Indonesia. This strategy, the shift to greater commercialisation, particularly of beef production, aligned with the Indonesian government's policies, and it was also supported by other countries, including the New Zealand government. These were smallholder farmers farming barley cattle, and what I'm drawing on here is, as I said, Dr. Yanawatati's research, which was done in parallel with the project of IFSCA, and her research helped to inform and enrich this project. She interviewed and worked with smallholder farmers who were farming cattle. These farmers farmed cattle, but the primary livelihood activity that they engaged with was in growing corn, jagung, and that was the main source of income for their household. Cattle, sapi, were a complementary activity that was used in conjunction with the other livelihood activities that they were involved with. Cattle were primarily seen as a form of saving. They were not seen to have the functions of consumption or production or exchange that we might expect in a livelihood that is focused on commercialisation and income, such as corn was. So the focus of the management of cattle was to sustain the animals to meet the needs for saving. It wasn't on sustaining the animal to optimise the levels of productivity, production from those animals. So the purchase and sale decisions around cattle, around the sapi, were not driven by market demand or price. And the local market reflected and perpetuated the values that were placed on cattle related to the way that they were seen by the smallholders. There were also, as many of you will know, depending on which country you're coming from, there were also religious and social norms associated with cattle, in line with various ceremonies through the year. So along with the work of Nadisha in Sri Lanka, and drawing on this work from Indonesia, we can see that the values and the cultural beliefs and the way that livestock are viewed is often not aligned to the type of perspective that is assumed necessary for a transition towards commercialisation. And the nature of the change required to support a shift by farmers from seeing animals as a form of saving, for example, to changing that view, but also the way they're managed, as well as their place within other livelihood activities. This requires major change. It requires changes in knowledge, it requires changes in beliefs, it requires changes in farming systems, but it also requires a change in the market, in the way that the market is valuing beef and cattle. Okay, so I'm going to extend a wee bit further now and come back to New Zealand Aotearoa, and drawing on research from Dr. Charlotte Drury, who is another PhD student that I worked with here in New Zealand. The context that this is relevant to is a transition, a sustainability transition in New Zealand in relation to freshwater governing, which is also related to a major sustainability transition aligned with environmental sustainability, which we are seeing in many other countries around the world, a move towards practices in agriculture that reflect more an understanding of the impact of agriculture on the environment and how agriculture can work with and foster and sustain the environment. But in this research, we're focusing primarily on freshwater. In New Zealand, we have regional government entities called regional councils that are responsible for the sustainable management of natural resources in each region. And there are, I think, around 14 regions in New Zealand. And so what we're talking about here is the management and the sustaining of the air, land and water. And of course, agriculture in New Zealand is one of the largest land uses that we have, and therefore also users of water, but ultimately impact on water quality. Regional councils, these regional government entities, are funded through rates paid for by landowners, farmers. And there is, within these councils, a council, an overriding governing body, like you might have a board of directors, and they are elected councillors, so elected from the community, by the community, to represent the community's views in that council operation. Traditionally, these councils have had a strong farmer representation and have tended to predominantly support productivist farming. You know, farming, producing food, production. Regional councils also have field staff, very much like extension staff, but working for the council, who work closely with farmers, in partnership with farmers, assist farmers. The traditional approach has been in New Zealand that there has been very limited formal regulation influencing farmers in New Zealand. Direct from central government, likewise from local government, from regional government, regional councils. There has been very little direct regulation shaping how farmers have farmed in the past. This is in general terms. Over the last decade, there have been major changes. Again, this is in line with that idea of a major transition, the sustainability transition. Central government now have a much greater direct intervention in what is happening on farm, including through regional councils around fresh water. And the impact of agriculture and how it's used in agriculture. And regional councils have introduced formal rules and regulations that are now influencing and shaping farmers in terms of what they can and they can't do to a much greater extent than we have seen in the past. Associated with this broadest change, there has been major changes within the Regional Council as well. The Regional Council, aligned with the broader sustainability transition that is occurring and the change in intervention from central government, there has been a shift in the logic of the way the council works and it operates from a productivist logic related to agriculture to an environmental protection logic. And the implications of this have been dramatic and continue to be, and many of the people in the council are still grappling with this change. It has also had impacts on, particular on the relationships between people. There has been a change in council's relationship with farmers as well as with non-farmers. And the power of the farmers in the council, in terms of those who are elected, has shifted. And there is a much more representation from non-farmers on the council now, which again is shaping the way that it's operating and the particular stance that it's taking. There has also been a change in the relationship between council field staff and farmers as a result of this. You know, imagine whereas before you were working in partnership with, they work closely with farmers, the field staff have a strong knowledge of agriculture and farming, they are now being asked to work with farmers using regulations and rules. So the nature of their relationship is changing and is shifting. This has forced field staff to reevaluate their identity as individuals, their careers, their status within the farming community, their status within the organisation has had to be changed and reevaluated. And some of these people have been in their career for 20 or 30 years, and now they're being asked to fundamentally change who they are and fundamentally change the nature of their relationship with farmers. There's also been a much stronger shift towards a reliance on evidence-based, science-based knowledge, away from more practical farming experience-based knowledge. The change has been hard. Personally, it's been difficult and it's been challenging, and it continues to be challenging and personal for many of these field staff who are working with farmers. And this aspect of transitions has generally been unrecognised and unsupported. There is research, and there's continued research reflecting some of the things that I presented in the earlier slide, that change on farm is hard as well. When you're asking farmers to change their fundamental beliefs about their views of animals, and therefore the way they interact with animals, their relationship with animals, their relationship with other people in their community, that also can be hard. It takes time to change those. It can be challenging, and it is personal. Okay, finally, and I've gone over time, I apologise. I just want to try and bring the strands of this presentation together. I started out by arguing for the need, I think, for us to think about food security and climate change as being a transition. And all countries, different countries, are going to be at a different stage of that transition towards a future that is more sustainable in relation to sustaining food security in the context of climate change. And to provide insights about the nature of that change and the experiences of farmers and others experiencing the type of change that is demanded by the situation we have to do with food security and climate change. I have drawn on some research that relates to transitions that are not climate change or food security transitions, but are still providing, I think, valuable insights in terms of the type of challenges as professionals we are going to face when we are designing policies or interventions to assist change, to help farmers, to help other people to move towards this new outcome we want. What has been highlighted? That required change for people is hard and challenging because it is personal, relational, and demands deeply personal change. And that we have to accept is for us as well, because in the nature of transitions and transformational change, we cannot exclude ourselves, the way we do our job, the way we do our science, the way we develop policy, our relationships with others and other entities, our relationship with farmers. That also needs to change, and that has implications for us personally as it does for other people. Not all change is good. Some of the traditional cultural values have huge capital for people. The example, the Sri Lankan low smallholders, their bonding networks within their community provided them resilience. And if there are any interventions that weaken those, that force change, will reduce the resilience of those smallholders. So we have to be very, very careful that when we are developing policies and thinking about change in this space, that we are not undermining the existence of resilience and strong cultural capital because we see the need for change. Those least well off are those least able to adapt. And we have not necessarily worldwide done particularly well in solving the problem of poverty and some of those other challenges. And I think this is a challenge that is also going to face us, is how we can develop tailored, context-specific interventions that do not ignore the diversity of circumstances of smallholders, as well as the actors that support smallholders. We need realistic expectations of the outcomes that we can achieve from interventions. And we need to recognise that this is going to take time. We also need to recognise the full extent of the changes that are going to be required if we are going to be successful. Keeping in mind what I talked about earlier, if we take on board this concept of the transition, of that need to think about multi-level change, multi-dimensional change, and I go back to the point that we within universities, within policy entities, cannot be excluded from that change. This is just reference to some of the research that I've drawn on. Terima kasih and haere, that's goodbye. Again, I just want to thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm also, again, I apologise for not being able to be with you. I wish you all the best for the rest of the conference, and I wish you all well and happiness. Haere.
Haere, Dr. Reid. Dr. Reid has put emphasis on the multi-dimensional effect of climate change on food security. And in some cases, she put emphasis that the diversification of activities, like giving example on her latest project with University of Mataram in Dompu, growing cattle and planting maize, is just an example of diversification to adapt to the climate change in order to meet the food security. But she also said that in order to make that more profitable, there's some changes need to be done in norm, belief, and market. But she also believed that the shift towards science-based knowledge, that replacing the farming practice-based knowledge, it's not always good for everyone. So we need to adjust that according to the local situation. Unfortunately, Dr. Reid doesn't have time to do the question and answer. So that's, but once mentioned Dr. Janwartati about her work in there with Dr. Reid. Possibly if you have any question later after the session, maybe you can deliver the question to Dr. Janwartati. That's all for the first session, and I say thank you to all of you for your patience to listen to the presentation, and I hand the time to the MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Komang Damarjaya, for leading these sessions, and also thank you very much for all the speakers for such informative and insightful presentations, and to all of you who participate and attend these sessions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, those are our agendas for this morning. As we have finished our plenary sessions, we are going to have a break for lunch and Zuhur prayer. After that, we will start our parallel sessions. Therefore, we would like to remind all of you that our sessions will start at 2 p.m. WITA, or Indonesian Central Standard Time. Please be noted to proceed to your presentation room as informed by the committee.
Ibu yang tutup aja. Udah ada kalimat penutupannya.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention and your patience in attending this opening ceremony and the plenary session, and looking forward to having you in parallel session. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow.
Bapak Ibu, sekarang Bapak Ibu dapat menikmati hidangan makan siang, dan hidangan makan siang sudah disiapkan di poolside restaurant, dan Bapak Ibu bisa melaksanakan sholat zuhur di musola di lantai 2. Untuk peserta yang akan presentasi di ruang 1, presentasi akan dilakukan atau paralel sesi akan dilakukan pukul 2 nanti di ruangan ini. Sedangkan untuk peserta yang akan presentasi di ruang 2 hingga 7 berada di lantai 2. Terima kasih.